Thank you, Gerard, for this most informative and enriching talk. You've made clear a number of points, of issues. You've made clear what the stakes are, what the implications are, and you've pointed to the lessons of history, which we very much cherish and appreciate. You've also made clear what the options along the spectrum are, which I might summarize as good deal, first option, bad deal, second option, no deal, third option, or, quite controversially, no Brexit, which is along the lines of your question, is Brexit inevitable? Legally, it seems not to be inevitable. The question is whether it is politically inevitable. Now, with this in mind, I leave the floor to Mr. Riccardo Perissich, former DG of Industry at the European Commission and Vice President of the Council for Italy and US relationship. And I also would like to put this on the table. After the Brexit vote, I remember an article by a former ambassador to Russia, Sergio Romano, stating, as many others have done since then, that Brexit might turn out into a benefit for European integration, since the UK has always stood in the way of an ever closer union. And I would like also to hear your opinion on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, it works. Well, first of all, I want to thank the professor. It was a fascinating introduction, very, very stimulating. I was impressed by your awkward timeline to Brexit. It made me feel younger, in fact. I guess I am the only person in this room who actually participated in the entry negotiations for the UK in the then European Community from 1970 and 72. Then I participated in the Wilson renegotiation of 75, and then in the Thatcher budget rebate between 79 and 84, in the Thatcher coup d'etat in Milan in 85 that led to the single market. So I spent 24 years of my life in Brussels, and a lot of time was spent on British problems. Like most my compatriots, I was, and to some extent I still am, a passionate Anglophile. You know, we wanted in the Mother of Parliament and all that, you know, and we thought it would be extremely useful. I've come to the conclusion that Italian Anglophilia has more to do with culture and aesthetics than with politics. And I sometimes wonder whether we are more interested in Jermyn Street rather than in Downing Street. We had a different England in mind when we expressed our Anglophilia. I changed my mind later, actually when Tony Blair failed to bring the country into the euro. Then I gave in to a different reading of the UK. I thought that, no, it will never work. It will never work for very respectable reasons, but it is true that the country is different. The UK has systematically failed to understand what the whole system is about, and failed to understand the nature of the very complicated interaction between France and Germany. You know, they have lived through 40 years with the illusion that they could divide France from Germany, and systematically failed. That was the major blunder. The problem was not with the diplomats. Whitehall always understood what Europe was about. It's the politicians and the country behind the politicians that never understood the system. This is a sort of preliminary, but it was triggered by your interesting timeline to Brexit, which brings me to the final remark of our moderator. There are two theories Brexit is going to be good for European integration, Brexit is going to be bad for European integration. I think that both are wrong. In our mind, Brexit has already happened. It's a difficult negotiation, it will take a lot of time, but there is a gentleman called Michel Barnier who takes care of that. And if one thing is absolutely established, is that the solidarity of the 27 will take precedence over anything. To give you an example that is close to your heart, given your origin, we are siding with the Irish on the border question. And we shall side with the Polish on the immigration question, and we shall continue to do so. The European Union has gigantic problems. It may or may not succeed, it could well fail, but whether it fails or not has nothing to do with Brexit. We have a number of priorities. It's immigration, how to make sure that the next crisis can be handled by the Euro system in a more effective way. What do we do with Mr. Trump? You know, we have gigantic, what do we do with Russia? Brexit is one of them, but it's certainly not a priority. Not a priority for us. It's regrettable, which doesn't mean we are not negotiating in good faith. We certainly are negotiating in good faith. There is neither need nor interest for the Europeans to, quote unquote, punish the UK for Brexit. It's not in our interest to do so. Second point, I confess that I don't understand what soft Brexit is. Because if soft Brexit means retaining access to the single market, then the UK government would have to give up the Lancaster House conditions. There is no way to retain access to the single market without accepting the role of the Court of Justice, without accepting free movement of people, and without accepting some limitation in the UK right to negotiate with third countries. You know, so the three fundamental conditions of the Lancaster House speech would have to be at least modified. Your list of options was, of course, very complete. You know, the Norwegian option is the one one thinks about. The Norwegian option means that you have everything but not a seat at the table, which brings me to think that you had soft Brexit already. Soft Brexit was the situation the UK was in before the referendum. You know, you're part of the single market, part of the customs union, part of many things, but not of some core business like the Euro, Schengen, etc. That was, for all practical purposes, soft Brexit. I don't really see how a proud country like the UK can accept the price that would have to pay for full access to the single market without a political advantage. You know, it would be a losing proposition from whatever angle you look at it. So what is the possible outcome? The key question, as you know, in the negotiation now is called sequencing. You know, how far do we have to settle the three main issues before we can actually start talking about what happens next? My instinct is that the European Union could well be a bit more flexible in sequencing. The problem we have is that we don't feel that we have a reliable partner in London. If we make a move on sequencing, which type of response shall we get? You know, the credibility of the British government is at stake right now because of internal divisions. You know, all these things that you know much better than I do. But assuming we by December or sometimes later than December, we can come to some type of preliminary agreement on the three main issues, which is a big if, then which type of most people now, particularly after the Florence speech, think that transition is the thing. Transition is, of course, necessary. Transition is very useful. It is not the solution, because transition cannot go on indefinitely. Nobody wants an indefinite translation. So it wouldn't make much sense to decide that we have a transition unless we have some idea of the type of relationship that is going to develop after the transition. The most likely candidate is what I would describe as Canada Plus. A very good, very extensive trade agreement, probably better than Canada. The great advantage that we have in the British case is that while all the trade agreements that we negotiate at the moment must include an objective of how to make rules converge, in the UK case, it's the opposite. We already have the same rules. So we are starting with a level playing field. The purpose of the negotiation is to avoid divergence afterwards. That is, of course, impossible. It's impossible to have an agreement that guarantees that there will not be divergent, because the premise is that we shall both be sovereign systems. Therefore, we shall both retain our freedom to change the rules. But the fact of starting from the same point is a plus. It's a very important thing. I think it's going to be extremely useful when you come to merchandise. I'm very skeptical about services, and particularly financial services. A passport is a passport. Banks either have a passport or they don't. And I don't see how this can be solved in the negotiation. You may have noticed that the US Secretary of Commerce recently came to London telling you that you have to choose between European rules and US rules. Well, he's right. He's right. But we are so much bigger than the US in terms of trade that common sense would give you the answer. If you choose to stick with European rules, then that would limit your freedom to negotiate with the US. You really have a dilemma there. And I think this financial service part of the negotiation will probably be the most difficult part of the trade agreement. And I confess that I fail to understand why the Prime Minister has decided not to give enough priority to the future of the city, but that's a political choice. It's up to them. Now, next point, it's what puzzles me is that, well, just before the referendum, my instinct was telling me that Brexiteers would win, simply because the Brexit campaign was politically and intellectually so much superior than the defensive campaign that the Remainers had staged. So I was not surprised. But it is true that both campaigns had no vision for the future of the country. I don't know. I leave that to you. Will the UK break up or not? I don't want to get into that. But I don't understand. What I don't understand is which type of country these people have in mind. The future, role in the world, the type of, I don't know. I have a son who studies in the UK now, and he tells me that he, like most of his colleagues, went to study in the UK, not only for the superiority of the British university system, which is well known, but because they were attracted by this glittering cosmopolitan country, this country open to Europe and the world. And he tells me that after the referendum, there has been a sudden change of atmosphere. Everything has suddenly become more parochial, and people feel less welcomed. And Many of them want to leave. Nothing concrete has happened. It's simply the cosmopolitanism is not there. Boris Johnson can say what he wants, but cosmopolitanism has gone. Even in London, you can feel that it is not what it used to be. So, which type of country is this going to become? And finally, the U-turn. I would love the U-turn. As long as nobody believes, as unfortunately Tony Blair seems to be suggesting in his paper, that if you decide to ask for a U-turn, we could give you more than was already given in the Cameron negotiation. No way. No way, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier. What I want to ask you is, what type of political scenario do you have in mind that would bring the UK to a U-turn? Because it doesn't seem to me that the present political setup, the present state of the Conservative Party, the present state of the Labour Party, could possibly lead to that, unless there is what in shorthand I would call a Macron-type political implosion of the British political system. Unless that happens, I don't see how the U-turn could materialize. Do you see any reason, and this is my final, I end with a question, do you see any sign, any reason that the present setup of the British political system could implode in a way that would make a radical change of attitude possible?
Thank you, Mr. Perissich, for your thoughts, for sharing thoughts. Now, you've been mentioning a number of issues that I'm sure will come back in our discussion in a few minutes. Now, and giving the floor to Professor Malfa, former Minister of European Affairs, you've been mentioning the euro twice, I think, and you've been mentioning the euro system twice, and one might also wonder how much the dysfunction or the mismanagement of the euro has made Europe a less attractive club, even for countries that did not have the euro, like Britain. So, and given the floor to Mr. Lamalfa, is Brexit not a priority for Europe?
First of all, I want to thank Professor Cann for this highly interesting inside view of the Brexit process. And I will make a short comment on the question you raised, whether Brexit is going to help or whether endanger or damage the European Union. But before that, I want to tell a personal story, because Riccardo has participated in the story of English participation in the Union. But while I was listening to Professor Cann, it came back to me. I was in Cambridge as a student in January, I don't quite remember, 63 or 64, when General de Gaulle made a press conference shutting down the first negotiation. Now, I was very young, and I was sitting at the cafeteria down the Department of Economics, and all of a sudden, Professor James Mead, then Nobel Prize for Economics, one of the most brilliant minds I met in Cambridge, sat just in front of me, and which was very, very odd, because it was very not easy to talk to students, and very young students as well. He said to me, he knew where I came from my family and so on. He said, Giorgio, today I'm very happy. I said, why are you very happy, Professor Mead? Because General de Gaulle said no. Because it would have been a betrayal of our Australian and New Zealand friends who gave us food during the war against the Germans if we had got into the common market. Well, Mead was a Labour Party man and was an intellectual of the first grade. At the same time, he continued, without stopping, he said, at the same time, I am furious against General de Gaulle, whom we hosted during the war, because he dares say no to Her Majesty's government. Then I said another few words and I left. And for the next 50 years, since then, up to date, I had very clear in my mind the contradictory status of an Englishman of high intellectual standing, a man of totally logical mind. He was in absolutely two minds, totally two minds, whether UK should be in or whether UK should be out. Whether it was good to be with the French and Germans or whether it should be much better to be in the Atlantic together with the Anglo-Saxon community, which is Canada, United States, which is no longer as Anglo-Saxon, New Zealand, and their mutton and butter, and Australia. So this is the reason why, so to speak, finally, when put to the question, do you want to stay, do you want to get out, UK said, we want to stay out. They could have said, we stay in. But it is so divided in the mind of English people, the question of the relationship with Europe, that if you ask the question, you can get either answer, and here we got the answer. So it seems to me very difficult that they go back. I totally agree with Riccardo. It is very difficult for UK to go back from the referendum, because the risk would be that the next referendum might be even stronger reaction. I come to the second question, the second comment I want to make. It is the answer to Ambassador Romano's statement. It is better for them, it is better for us. It is certainly not better from them. From what Professor McCann told us, it may be also the end of what he called the post-war consensus. So in other words, we might find ourselves with a serious political problem in UK. We have a problem like this in Andalusia, in whatever it is, in Barcelona. We might have a problem with Scotland and with Ireland. So it is not certainly it was a mistake for UK. It is also a great damage for us. I think that the presence of UK with their skepticism was very helpful to us. I must confess that I am very worried by the weight of Germany within the Union, of the, so to speak, the almost inevitable tendency of Germany to dominate and to pretend that the European Union becomes as similar to them or to the idea of what we should be. And I'm not sure, I don't think France can be a countervailing power to this strong domination of Germany. And therefore, the presence of the UK within the European Union was an element of, so to speak, balance, which no other country can exercise within the Union. So it is a disaster, perhaps, as Professor McCann suggests, for UK, the decision of Brexit. It is certainly a disaster for us. I don't think that Europe should go towards a closer union. I think enough, what we have today is enough and perhaps too much of a union. Perhaps we should try to loosen the links within Europe, allow more breathing space to European members, European Union members, and therefore the absence of UK from the European table seems to me very negative for the prospect of the European Union, which should not be the prospect of a closer union, but as I say, the closer of a more flexible, more delicate, more full of respectful union towards the member countries.